ये रेडियो पाकिस्तान पॉडकास्ट है।
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wahlul 'uqdatam min lisani yafqahu qawli. Starting with the name of Allah, the most magnificent and the most merciful. This is our Laraib from Planet FM 87.6. So today is 8th March and this is our special episode for Women's Day, and for that we have Dr. Qaneeta Haseeb, and she is a pharmacist by profession, and she has a remarkable personality, and she has tons of experience and inspirational stories. So welcome on the board, ma'am.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for joining us and accepting our invitation to be the guest speaker today.
Of course, thanks for inviting me. It's very nice of you, and it's very nice to see you in this position.
Thank you so much, ma'am. It's a privilege to have you here. So how is your life going?
I have recently relocated to Pakistan after spending a few years abroad, and currently I work at Shifa Tamil Millat University in a research assistant position. I also teach there as a guest lecturer.
Alright.
So alhamdulillah, life has its ups and downs, but it goes on. I'm grateful for where I am in my life right now, and look forward to where I want to go.
That's really good. So, ma'am, as today is Women's Day, so we'll be discussing some personal stories, your journey, and the barriers and obstacles that women receives from the community. So, first of all, what is the significant obstacle that women face in Pakistan?
I think I often talk about this, that alhamdulillah, we've come a long way in Pakistan, especially where, from our mother's generations, where even just going out to work was seen as a bad thing, where, it would be looked down upon, where your husband couldn't provide for you, or, but right now it's normalized. However, there's still a long way to go, even in workplace. I think one of the biggest obstacle is that we've modernized our women's gender role, where we're also contributing to the household financially, where, however, we do not receive any additional support for the time we're not at the house, at the home, and we still have to go back to the house and do all the things we were doing traditionally. So that is one of the biggest challenges I think women face today, especially as a working woman. But I think generally just lack of recognition and lack of acknowledgement for all the work, all the contribution women make to the economy and to the society as a whole. My mom used to say that we say that only 52% of Pakistani population contributes towards the labor. She would say it's just that 48% of the population is doing unpaid labor.
Exactly.
So, somebody who wakes up, presses your clothes, makes your breakfast for you to go to work, for you to go to school, that is also labor. It just goes unacknowledged and it goes unappreciated. So I think that's something that's been going on for generations, and maybe, eventually we'll address it and provide support that is required, because our domestic and social and economic landscape is changing. We now exist in a society where a one income household is not a reality. Everyone has to contribute. If you're married, you have to contribute. If you are a daughter or a son, you have to contribute to your household. Obviously. So we exist in that society, and women have stepped up. I think it's time for our counterparts to step up as well and provide support. If we are stepping out of our traditional gender role, where we're doing something we weren't supposed to do, which was traditionally a male-dominant field, where we're now working and providing financially to our families, I think it's it's prime time for men to also then contribute to the household, because the workload hasn't diminished. The workload is, and there's a scientific research that proves that, because women have so much of overload of responsibilities now inside and outside the house, that women are more likely to develop autoimmune diseases because of this. So just because of that, I think that's a major barrier that we still have to overcome.
All right. So have you ever taken any kind of risk in your life?
Yes. So, as I say, I've recently relocated to Pakistan. I moved abroad for my master's in 2021, and I think I was the first woman ever in my
family?
family to like I have had cousins who've gone abroad, studied, and come back home, mashallah. But I was the first person who just decided to stay, and I worked and I lived alone for like 2.5 years, and it was something I'd never done, and I had always wanted to do. And obviously there's always that backlash from the society. And my family, my immediate family, alhamdulillah, is very progressive and very supportive. They've always supported me in whatever I want to do within reason. But there's always that social backlash that their daughter lives alone, they've just given up and they're not adhering to the social values. So obviously, alhamdulillah, I'm very grateful for my family's support and sticking up for me and letting me do what I want to do. And then similarly, when I was 17, I had the opportunity to go on an exchange program to the US for a year. And my family, again, obviously they had their reservations because I was 16 years old, but they had to step up to their family members. I know that my mother had a brother who didn't want me to go, and as a consequence, he stopped talking to her we do face those challenges, but I'm so grateful that my parents have always supported my wishes. And if I was the one who got the scholarship, I wouldn't have been able to go and fulfill my dream of living abroad at such a young age. But alhamdulillah, with their support. So obviously there's challenges and there's barriers. So sometimes families and your social support network system helps you achieve your dreams. And I think I am very privileged in that sense, where I am able to lean on my support system and my family for that kind of support, where they would sometimes sacrifice their own relationships.
That time must have been depressing for you. How did you handle those comments?
I think it definitely was, because you feel the guilt, because my mom was very close to her siblings as well. So you feel the guilt. And one thing my grandmother used to say, that it's your life and you are the one who has to deal with the consequences, and you are the one who has to live with the life. So why do you let others decide how you should live it? If it's your child who's going to live abroad, you're the one. If there's any implications, God forbid, if something bad was to happen to me, my parents would be the one to lose a child, or to deal with the implications of whatever it was. So why should we give other people a right to have a say in that? And I think just having that from somebody older than my parents' generation, saying that something relatively progressive, because we as a society are very entrenched with social pressure. If one person in the society is against something you want to do, then your parents would eventually succumb to that pressure. But to have your grandparent, somebody from an even older generation come and support that idea was very comforting. And it helped me cope with it. And anytime I apologized to my mother, and she was like, I made the decision, it was my decision. So the pressure of the burden of that decision lies on me, you don't have to worry about it. So of course, I think with time it gets easier, but definitely, again, wouldn't be possible without the support of other people, especially women, in my life.
And that's really admirable. So ma'am, did you ever think you were giving up?
I think I give up very easily. I would say I give up almost every day. And to be honest, it's not a bad thing to give up. I think the illusion of giving up is made to be something negative. But sometimes you need to give up, and then you realize, okay, that's why I needed to do that, and that's why that thing was important. We do get, discouraged, and sometimes isolated as well whenever you're taking a stand for something that is important to you. So you do give up, and sometimes it's important to give up as well. I think one of the things I've learned later in life, I've now entered my 30s, so that sometimes we fight for things for too long that are no longer serving us, that are no longer adding value to our life. So sometimes it's a positive thing to give up, and loss is sometimes a gain in a way. So I think giving up is part of the journey, and we should sometimes give up.
So what used to be your motivation?
I think for me, as I say, alhamdulillah, because I have such a supportive family, I obviously not just selflessly want to do just it for them. I've always felt like that I need to make something of myself, and I need to, make a name for myself. And
Alright.
alhamdulillah, I feel like just because we are answerable to Allah for the
Exactly.
resources He gives us, we are also answerable if He's given us certain intellect, or if He's given us certain resources, if He's given us certain privilege, we are answerable to Him. So if He's given me, a supportive family, a platform to stand on, what do I do with that is something I'm answerable to Him eventually at the end of the day.
Exactly.
So that's obviously been one of my biggest motivations. But also, when you say you have such a supportive family, so you all feel a sense of obligation that, I should do something to make them proud.
Yes.
And I don't know if I've been successful so far, but that's
You have been. No, you have been.
so basically that's always, if it's a gold medal, or if it's a job, or if it's a distinction, or if it's a scholarship, it's always, it is for myself, but it's also back of my mind is for my family, because they could have just said no to so many
Exactly.
things I wanted to do in my life, but they have never said no. So obviously I feel a nagging sense of obligation where I must do something to make them proud. I have 2 nieces and I love them more than anything.
Mashallah.
And I also always do things. Sometimes I go out of my way to make a point of things so that they know that it's okay to offend people, and it's okay to do what you want to do, and it's okay to live your life on your terms. So it's very important for me to, as an aunt, as a khala, to set an example for them that they
Exactly.
can live their life the way they want. So yeah, if I had to say in one word what motivates me, I think it would be my family.
All right, mashallah. That's really good. So, if you ever get a chance, so what advice would you like to give to your younger self?
I think I would tell my younger self to be more compassionate and more
Alright.
understanding and more forgiving to others, but also to myself. I think we as women are conditioned to be very hard on ourselves,
Exactly.
and we're also pitted against each other as well. Unfortunately, with the way the social systems work, where it's always a constant competition, where we think
Exactly.
that somebody else winning means me losing, but that's not always the case. There's enough cake for everybody. So I would just give that advice to myself, but still keeping in mind that had I not made those mistakes as a younger person, I wouldn't be the person I am today. So I think there's just certain things you learn with time,
Alright.
and we should not be too hard on our older selves as well. Okay, why was I like that? Why was I so judgmental? Why was I so unforgiving? Because sometimes you have to make those mistakes
Exactly.
to learn from them. So but yeah, I would definitely tell myself to be more compassionate and less judgmental.
All right. So, ma'am, what does women empowerment means to you?
So it's very interesting because I grew up in a household with no sons, and we were 2 daughters, and then
Alright.
my uncle had 2 daughters, so there was no brothers and there was no comparison. So growing up, I just for me, the idea was that women are just equals to men,
Alright.
right? And just because I was living in my little bubble myself, where in my privileged bubble, where I didn't think I didn't have to face any discrimination within my own household, I always thought that, sexism is just what women make up to get attention and things like that. It's only until you come into the real world
Right,
and you start
exactly.
realizing all the obstacles you do. Because, if you have brothers, you start realizing very young, when you're in your teenage, you're told to stop going out to play in the
Yes.
evening, while they still go out, and
Yes. And
they
they
stay
play.
out very late. But I just knew that my sister couldn't go, I couldn't go, so there was no comparison. So because of that, I never really realized the obstacles and the real challenges women face in life. So I think I was in university, and one day one of my professors said to our classmates, because I studied pharmacy, and usually the makeup of that classroom is that it's 85% girls and 15% boys, right? So and just by the virtue of that statistic, girls would usually do better in class than boys.
Yes.
And one of my professors was like just jokingly talking to boys how girls, they're going to be the sole providers for their families, so they should step up and they should do better and they should get better grades, while us, we're just going to put all our money in our bank accounts. And that just like strung a nerve with me, because unfortunately there was a time in my life where my dad wasn't able, was unemployed for a period of time, and my mom was primary provider. And that's okay, because that's what you do in a partnership.
Exactly.
When one person is unable to do something, you help them, support them. So for me, that idea was so obscure, because my mom was a primary provider for so long, and I always wanted to be a financially independent person. So for me, the idea that, you know, somebody saying that just because I don't have as much financial
Exactly.
responsibility, or might because of the social system that you have created, is I don't have the right to excel as much. That was, I think, you know, when people say what radicalized you, I think of that particular moment as well, that, you know, that's when I started to realize that, you know, how many barriers women have to cross. And then just stories of women around me where, even though I had a lot of privilege in that sense, where other girls had to struggle, they had to fight, make compromises to just to let their parents to allow them to get a higher education. I had a classmate who, you know, had to agree to get married before she got into university, because their parents were like, we will only allow you to go to university if you marry the person we want you to marry. So obviously, I think women empowerment for me means that women are able to make their own choices, live their life on their own terms. I think having social values, having boundaries is important. It just gets really frustrating when those boundaries are just, you know, applied to one section of the society and not the other. So I think equality and independence it's what's women empowerment is
equally important.
Yeah.
All right. So, ma'am, what would you say about the women living in rural areas?
Of course, women living in rural areas, obviously Pakistan has such a diverse, you know, a diverse population, given more than half of our population lives in rural area, and they unfortunately don't even have access to education like we do. And that again is again, you know, you're reminded of your privilege that, you know, for me, I had to go to school. There was no option. Sometimes I hated going to school. It felt like a burden. But then there is girls who can't go to school solely based on the logistics, because it's so far away and it's not safe for their parents to send them to, you know, 2 hours away to on a bus, on public transport to school. So what do? They choose to not send their daughters to schools. It's relatively safer or easier for boys to travel, so boys then have a better opportunity at education. I think the responsibility in that sense then lies with the government and governing bodies and establishment, because obviously as parents you can't build a school every time you need to send your child to a school, and obviously they are still a victim of the system, where, you know, they should have equal access to education. They should have equal access to opportunities. So I think the government and I think people in charge, people in power have more responsibilities to create an equitable environment where opportunities while they might not be exactly same for the people living in urban settings, they can be comparable. And the least we could do, we live in a modern day where technology has solved so many problems. Why aren't virtual schools a thing in Pakistan? You know, in even like we are all familiar with the sad reality of ghost schools in Pakistan, where there might be schools in rural settings, but nobody goes there. They're just there and people get paid to go there, but those buildings are used for other purposes. So I think modern problems require modern solutions. And since my master's is in global health, where the focus is in finding solutions for problems in healthcare systems in low resource settings, right? So obviously this is not a health related problem, but it is a similar problem where we have low resources, but technology can, you know, help resolve that issue with community based learning, with people, with encouraging people, you know. In rural areas, one of the things happened, if somebody does get educated, then they want to move to a bigger city for better opportunity. And I don't blame them. I think then again, the responsibility lies with power holders, where they make it lucrative for them to, you know, stay in their communities, teach in their communities, spread that education.
And that family backlash and typical mindset of some people in rural areas.
Exactly. So, I mean, it's a multi-faceted issue. It has so many avenues for it to be solved, but I think something needs to be done, and especially in today's day and age where our literacy rates are so low, especially in rural areas. And then again, women are the ones who are victim of this issue because obviously access and safety and security. And I know a lot of non-governmental organizations are working towards this issue, but there's only so much they can do, and every time there is a solution that comes from a stakeholder that's external,
Exactly.
it's not sustainable. We need a sustainable solution that is long term, and I think it's not that difficult. We just need to put our resources and we need to our minds towards and prioritize those issues rather than, things that are not as important. I think education and health in rural areas is extremely important and something that needs to be prioritized.
All right. So, ma'am, which woman inspired you?
This question gets me every time because I think I don't know a single woman in my life who hasn't inspired me.
All right.
My paternal grandmother was a teacher in the 60s, 70s, and
Mashallah.
she taught all her life, and she was an extremely cool person. Like, she used to do art, and on our birthdays she would make us birthday cards and things like that, and she was just
Mashallah.
so compassionate and loving. My maternal grandmother was a social activist. Although she had no formal education, she was one of the smartest women I knew. Like, she was such a genius, but she had no access to education, so she never went to
Okay.
school. My mother, she worked hard all her life. She she passed away very early on in her life. It will be 10 years now, but she had 2 bachelors, she had 2 masters, she had a master's in philosophy. She was enrolled in a PhD at the time of her death, and she was constantly learning, and
Mashallah.
she worked most of my life. I was 2 and 3 years old when she started working, and constantly she was enrolled in one program or in the other. If she wasn't getting like a degree, she was getting a diploma. So she was always doing, and she was equally involved in our lives. She would make sure we did our homework before we went to bed, and she would make sure everything was okay with our friends. And then now that I'm an adult myself, I look around my sister. She balances so many things herself so well. My friends, they've had their own set of obstacles, and they've all overcame them, and they've built, mashallah, wonderful lives for themselves.
Mashallah.
So my students, I see you guys, and I take so much inspiration from younger women in my life. My niece, she's 11 years old, and she's always
Mashallah.
keeping me right. Every time I'm like, why don't you do this? She's like, why don't you do this? And it just annoys me at the moment, but she's right. So
That's really cute.
exactly. So I think I literally have never met a woman in my life that has not inspired me. And I think sometimes it's unfair because the society puts us so much pressure on us that we have to fill so many roles that just existence is inspiring.
And remaining unacknowledged.
And then it's almost always unacknowledged.
So, ma'am, how can men empower women?
I think so. I talk a lot about privilege, and I think with privilege comes responsibility. We live in a patriarchal society,
Yes.
which inherently gives men a lot more privilege than it does women. And I think it's the responsibility lies then with the men to use that privilege to raise the voices of women. Privilege is contextual in every, in every scenario. However, male privilege is something that's universal. We live in a patriarchal world. It can be as simple as asking your parents, why does your sister not get as much pocket money as you do?
Yes.
Why, or taking responsibility that, okay, allow her to go out as well. I will take responsibility. If you don't think it's safe for her, I'll go with her, I'll protect her. If I have the privilege that in the society I can be more in the outside world, I have more security, and I will use that security to protect my sister.
Exactly.
It can be as menial as telling other person to not raise their voice at your wife. It can be as small as when you see that you got a promotion and your female counterpart didn't, but you have to just acknowledging to her that I understand that you have so much more you do. You have household responsibilities, and just acknowledging that effort that she puts in and how much more she has to do to get just this equal level of recognition. I think it doesn't have to be, you know, revolutionary, or you don't have to
Yes.
topple governments or do something. I think it can be as small as your day-to-day activities where acknowledging. Something I read once was, you know, women get nervous when they're walking on a road and there's a man walking behind them. So there
Exactly.
was like somebody had explained that if they see a woman is walking in front of them, they speed up and they start walking in front of them, so they don't have to turn around and, you know, worry about
Yes.
who is behind them and if they're going to attack them. And that's such a small thing to do, but imagine the impact it has. So I think it doesn't have to be a grand gesture. Small things have ripple effect. Just change of behavior, acknowledging your privilege and then trying to
Exactly.
use it to benefit others. Often systems don't change until the people of privilege don't challenge them, and people of privilege usually don't challenge the systems that exist to benefit them. So recognizing that we don't have a fair world unless everyone has equal fair opportunity is the starting point. And then once you recognize that privilege, you start to use it.
And I think this is the time where we need to appreciate the achievement of women too,
Of
instead
course,
of
definitely. And I think one thing living abroad I recognized was that, you know, growing up in Pakistan, we always think, oh, women don't have this in
yes,
Pakistan and it's so much easier for women abroad. Relatively, yes, women have easier lives living abroad. I lived abroad. I could walk anywhere at if it was 10 p.m. or 11 p.m. I could just go out. So it's relatively safer. Things are relatively okay, but it's still not a level playing field. You know, misogyny exists in every part of the world. Female discrimination exists in all parts of the world.
exactly.
People are denied jobs because they're, you know, but in other countries in modern world, they're legislature to, you know, prevent that kind of discrimination. In Pakistan, sometimes you go to job interviews and they ask you, what are your future plans? Are you planning to
Yes,
get married
married.
soon? Are you planning to get have a baby soon? Because
And
that then affects your likelihood to be employed, because nobody wants to
and
give.
how you're gonna manage that stress.
Exactly, but they also think, oh, she will get married and she'll move to another
Yes,
city. If she has a baby, we'll have to pay for her maternity leave. So like in other countries, there's legal frameworks, there's legislations where you cannot ask these questions to
exactly.
people. So obviously there's a need for improvement from our people in power and bodies of power and legislative changes. But there's a definite need for change in mindset, where you recognize that in today's day and age we cannot exist without acknowledging the labor of women, whether it's inside the house or in outside.
All right. So, ma'am, when do you think you have started making a difference in someone's life?
I think you can make a difference. It can be as small as just sitting down and listening to somebody's problem and making them feel heard.
All right.
I think a lot of issues, you know, recently there was this movie called Mrs. and everybody was watching
Yes,
it and it was so impactful. And I think one of the main key takeaways from it for me was that she's not as offended whenever they criticize her. She's more hurt whenever she puts an effort and do things exactly the way they want her to do, and they still do not acknowledge and
yes,
appreciate it. And I think that's just a generational tale of women where we put in so much effort, and anytime we raise our voice, it says women complain, they can never be happy. But it comes from ages of unacknowledgement. So I think you make a difference in a woman's life just by acknowledging that I acknowledge how much work you do. And
exactly.
I'm sitting here making all these, you know, how it's not very often I do, like I should also be making an conscious effort of acknowledging the women who do the work in my household, who do the work that makes my life easier. You know, maybe when I go home I should tell my sister, thank you, you know, you made a iftari tonight, or this was very helpful that I didn't have to wake up for sehri, and I could
Yes,
get that extra 30 minutes of sleep. So I think making we don't know what, you know, we are taught this from a very young age in a subtle way, where we read poems about, you know, words of kindness, and, you know, just listening to somebody, just we don't know, even a smile can have a massive impact on somebody. But I think we need to make a conscious effort to listen to people and acknowledge
exactly.
the efforts they put in. And I think even if you make a change in one person's life, I think that can have a ripple effect and have a social change. And if that one person is yourself, that is okay too.
And ma'am, it makes me sad. Like, I've heard stories of quite housewives. Like, they remain unacknowledged, and people say that your life is quite easier. And what do? You not go out of home, and you just manage everything at home. You're just in a house.
You don't have to
Yes.
leave the house. And that is such a sad reality because, as I said, unpaid labor, you know, how I was just saying that I don't have to wake up for Sehri. I get that to extra 30 minutes of sleep. And how does that impact my productivity, you know? So that would probably, if I was tired and I was not able to work as well because I had to wake up early and go to bed late because I had household responsibilities, it would impact my work. So what happens with household wives? Them taking out those household responsibilities, them taking care of the sick children, them stepping up whenever allows their husbands, allows the men of their family
Exactly.
to do well at work. You know, they don't have to take a day off when their child is sick because
Exactly.
their wife is at home taking care of that child that is sick.
And they think they have no struggles.
Exactly.
They need emotional stability. They need emotional support too.
Exactly.
They need rest too.
That is so valid. It's unfortunate that the work inside the house is not seen as important.
Yes.
Or as stressful. Living abroad on my own, I realized that, you know, managing a household is a full-time job as well.
Exactly.
And
with no break.
When you
A
manage
24/7 duty.
Exactly. You go to work and you come back and then you don't do anything. Your wife has been,
Yes.
she has been up since the morning, getting breakfast ready, getting the kids ready for school, making sure
Pressing
you have
your
everything.
clothes and uniforms of the children.
Exactly. And then she has to make sure everybody's clothes and everything is ready for tomorrow before going to bed, and she has to make sure kids brush their teeth. And unfortunately, you know, credit where it's due, I've seen a shift. I've seen that husbands in our generation are relatively better. They're more present fathers. They make sure they put in more work. So I do acknowledge it, even though it's their responsibility all along. But you know, yeah, a lot of times what we saw in our generation was that father's role was just of a provider. As long as they're paying for everything, they didn't feel the need to know their children's birthday or, you know, which grade they were in, and they were just very uninvolved. Because and after all of that, when the woman was carrying all the emotional labor and all the emotional burden, you turn around and you say, what have you done all day? You know, you've been at home. You didn't have to step out in the heat, or you didn't have to do anything. I think that just diminishes, and I think that can have a long-term psychological effect as well that trickles down through generations as well.
And the same father still receive that acknowledgement from children too because of that monetary support.
Exactly. It's extremely unfortunate. But what we can do is we try to change that mindset. We might not be able to change our father's or our grandfather's mindset, but by instilling just in ourselves and our friends and our future generations that, you know, this is also labor, this is also hard work, this doesn't happen by itself, you are responsible for taking care of our household is a full-time job. I think that will eventually,
and now new and younger mothers can inculcate that in their children or son's mind.
Exactly, absolutely. And I think it's more important to not just tell them, but also make them responsible for themselves. Like I was saying, you know, when we are in teenage, boys keep going out and we stay home and we're taught all the household responsibilities. I think it's very important. And again, the burden lies upon women as well because they are raising the sons. But it's very important to teach your sons to take care of their own clothes, put them in the put them in the laundry. Know how to cook just as well. As important as it is for a girl to learn to drive a car, it is as important for a guy to learn to cook. You know, nobody's expecting you to be a Michelin star chef, but everyone should be able to sustain themselves and have these essential life skills. So I think, again, unfortunately, we put the burden again on the women to do this labor as well. But I think one generation has to make certain sacrifices for the next generation to reap the rewards. So hopefully our generation does a better, not that they did a bad job, but is more aware that sons need to be raised just as socially aware, as involved in domestic labor as daughters, and maybe then the wives of the next generation will have an easier time.
All right. So, ma'am, I have to conclude the program. What message do you have for the women?
I think the most important message for women is that I think no one is coming to save us, and it's our responsibility to advocate for ourselves and for other women who have lesser privilege than us, and other people who have lesser privilege than us. So oftentimes we just do unnecessary sacrifices where we are like, oh, it's okay if, you know, I was denied this promotion, or it's okay if this person doesn't acknowledge my efforts, or it's okay if my kids are being disrespectful for me. I think it's very important that we step up for ourselves. If we feel like that we're denied something that is our right, it's our responsibility in the workplace to raise the voice, like, I did this work, these are my KPIs, why have I not been given this promotion? If you think that your partner, your husband, you know, your family doesn't acknowledge all the work you put in, you should be like, you know, it took me so many hours. And sometimes it's seen as nagging, but I think we need to advocate for ourselves, raise our voices for ourselves before we can raise our voices for other people. So I think it's very important that we stand up for ourselves, because, as I say, nobody else is coming to save us.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for joining us
having
today. It was a privilege to have you here, and it was a very informative session, and I hope you will be joining us again soon.
Thank you so much.
So best wishes for you. Thank you so much again, ma'am. All right, audience, it is all from our side, and I would like to end this episode, and I hope this would have been beneficial for you people too. So till next time, Allah Hafiz.
ये रेडियो पाकिस्तान पॉडकास्ट है।